Righto, so the diff's all installed and done. I've still got to put the brakes on it, but essentially that's pretty simple. Couple of bolts and bits and pieces. So yeah, the diff's all done. She's in. No real dramas with that. I've still got to connect up that handbrake cable yet, but that's easy. So yeah, it's come up really good. I've still got the brake lines to get done there at the shop, getting the fittings changed, because the EF brakes have different fittings on them. So the little center block where the lines come in, there's a fitting I need to change on the EF lines. So I'm using the EF brake lines on this. Otherwise you just use a little adapter. If you're using the whole EF series diff, there's a little adapter you got to buy, which changes on that little block there. You just put in a little adapter and it's job done. But I'm using the EF lines because it's an XE diff. I've explained before why, because I want the 277 ratio. So, and when I eventually find a 2.53, I'm going to change it to that. But they're pretty well hard to find because all the Speedway guys have got all them in their cars and they don't sell them. So yeah, no real surprises. It just sort of went in. So I guess the process, I'll just stand up and move around so you can explain it a bit better. So yeah, basically build as much as the diff as you can off the car, for obvious reasons. Yeah, so build as much as you can off the car. So that put the handbrake cable on the diff and put axles and whatever else you can in on the diff to save you mucking around later on. So and then just put it on a jack. Some people just use the wheels, put the tires and everything on it, but I didn't do that because I needed to. I was still waiting for bits and pieces for the brake line. So I just put it on the jack on a towel like that, and built her up and then rolled her in. The other problem with putting on wheels, you don't have much height. You lose. It's pretty hard to get under the car depending on how much room you got under there. So putting on a low profile jack and you can just roll the whole diff in there quite simply. So anyway, so what I did, I basically put the diff in position. I did the upper trailing arm first. Put it into the car here first because that's really tight. I found that I had to use a mallet to bash that in there. So that was really tight. The bottom one was fine. That was easy, that just slipped straight in. So I did that on both sides. I got these two set up on the car, and then on the diff side of it I just bolted the two arms onto the diff. So they just bolted in nicely. You can see they're not bolted up yet because you've got to tighten bolts with the diff loaded with tyres, wheels, car on the weighted and all that. So once they are in, the diff was sort of hanging there, supported by the jack still. Then I jacked up the jack to lift up the diff, and then you eventually get to a point where it's actually lifting up the back of the car. So that's when you put your spring compressors on here. Spring compressors on each side of the spring and shorten up the spring, and that brings the shocky into place. So of course make sure the shockies are installed, roughly installed, and yeah, the springs just slide up underneath in where the shock is. The springs just slide up under there before you lift it up with the jack. Sorry about that. So yeah, them installed, sit there, put your spring in, have it loose, make sure the rubber bushing thing is at the top of the spring, and make sure the rubber bushing is at the bottom in where the spring seat is. So make sure there's one rubber, bottom and top. Make sure your shocks don't tighten them up, don't sure you don't spin the shocky, the cylinder inside the housing, don't spin that. That can ruin the shockies. So anyway, jack her up and just make sure the spring goes into the top alignment. So just do a bit of time jack and then it'll fall in a spot. and make sure that spring, there's a little on the washer there, not on the bottom, the spring's actually got a little position where it actually sits. Impossible to see on camera, but there's a little bit on the rubber mount that the spring actually clicks into, so as you lift up the car, the spring moves back, so it actually comes out of its little spot, so you got to pull the spring back around to where it's supposed to be. So just make sure it's in its right position. It's obvious where it goes, but just make sure it's in there as you put the weight on the car. So once you've got the weight on, spring compressors 1, 2, compress that spring up, that'll pull the shocky into position, and you'll be able to put the bolt on the shocky, nice and easy. So it just slides in. So depending on what sort of spring compressors you got, there's not a lot of room up there for the spring compressors to actually extend into. So yeah, just be mindful you don't, when you're tightening up your spring compressors, it doesn't bloody bang up into the top of the car. So just make sure you position them right. And down here, if you put them too low, down there, you run out of room to operate the spring compressors properly. So just be mindful to set them up really well and give it a bit of a trial run beforehand. So then you put the bolt in for your shockies. Just make sure you don't tighten anything yet, just remember that. And then you put the Watts linkage in. So that's just a matter of positioning them into place. So they just position into place as needed. Yeah, so just do that. So that's all pretty straightforward. That just moves around and you can just squeeze them in there, and they work fine. They weren't difficult. So just do that while the jack is supporting the car, jack supporting the diff, because once you let it go, it goes under pressure. Okay, so yeah, basically that's done, and then you put the sway bar in. So the sway bar, the rear sway bar goes like that. These aftermarket thingy bobbies, that's why they're all hanging low. I've still got to finish them yet. So they're in, holding the sway bar, doing their job. So I'm assuming once you tighten them up, you just cut them off at the end. So yeah, everything else is all good. No real dramas, it just sort of did its job. So that's the basics on how to get them done. I had no real challenges at all. It was probably 5 hours, I think. I was on my own and I had to sort out nuts and bolts and all that and clean nuts and bolts as I went. So way longer than what it would take anyone else, but weekends he was a bit muck. I had a fair bit of mucking around to do. So yeah, anyway, so I'll chuck the discs on in a minute, and I forgot to get some brake squealing stuff. You got to put on the brake pads. I forgot to get that at the shop yesterday, so you got to do that yet. So I'll go to the shop today and grab the anti-squeal grease you put on the back of the pads, and then I should get the brake lines back from the shop, so I can get the brake lines fitted and finish off those rear brakes. So that's that for the diff install. Pretty straightforward, nothing tricky. That's all got brand new bushings, everything. New shocks, new bushings. It's all brand new back here. Completely rebuilt diff. New bearings, new seals, the whole works and jerks. She's basically brand new rear end. So the next job I'll be doing over the next few afternoons, because I'm actually back to work now. So I just thought I'd come in and do a quick video, and then I got to work all week. So that's going to be next weekend, or at night time, depending how much time I get. So that's all brand new, not brand new, but fully refurbished. So that's all ready to rock and roll. Everything's all ready to rock and roll. She's all pretty, looks good. Yeah. So that's my next job. So that's that. Anyway, that's all good. Alright, I shall do another update in the coming days as I do bits and pieces and as things get done. No worries. Thanking you.